Tuesday during hurricane season, and that means it's time to track the tropics. From cloudy, gloomy Central Florida, I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
And from Savannah, Georgia, I'm WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson. We had some rain here, hail yesterday, and now we are finally breaking a little bit of morning fog. So a little gloom here as well, some June gloom in our areas.
But it's all kind of tied to the tropics, interestingly enough, Jeremy.
Yeah, we have some tropical moisture down there, and I'll let Eric take this because almost well timed here. Like we brewed this up just for our track in the tropics. We have a new invest.
Yeah, that's right. And it's kind of funny how this played out. It's literally within just the last few minutes' time. The Hurricane Center tags this as Invest 90. So it's the first invest of the season. All that tropical moisture sitting just off of Southwest Florida. And it's kind of a situation where there's a bunch of moisture. It's not necessarily doing much at the moment, but we do think that eventually this will probably try to pulse up just a little bit. Winds are at 25. It's not all that organized, all right? But the Hurricane Center did take note, called it an area of interest this morning, and said that while the atmospheric conditions are not necessarily ripe for development, as it crosses the Florida Peninsula and moves essentially up and off the eastern seaboard, there is enough of an opportunity, Jeremy, for some subtle development. So over the next 7 days' time, there's a 20% likelihood of development.
Yeah, and this is only the second time this year we've had an area of interest form really anywhere in the Atlantic Basin. A few weeks ago, we had one down near Cuba, headed towards maybe southeast Bahamas, Turks and Caicos. But this one is going to be much more impactful, not necessarily because of whether it develops into maybe some sort of weak tropical storm or not, but instead it's going to just be a torrential rainmaker for parts of Florida. And it's really kind of a front hung up. There's a few waves riding along that. And this is the one we'll be watching again. Invest 90L. And it's not meant to scare anyone. It's just what an invest is, an investigatable area of low pressure.
Yeah, it's not like it was upgraded at all this morning. All it is that the National Hurricane Center's watching it. They want to be able to run computer models on it. And I think that that's the biggest takeaway. When you get an invest, that just means computer models are running. Now, first off, these are the early models on Invest 90. There's squiggly lines. There's nothing consistent there. And that's probably, Jeremy, because it's weak. It's hardly anything at all. And because of that, computer models are going to struggle trying to put any kind of future together.
Yeah, and I think most models we have looked at keep this a decent amount off the southeast coast and a fairly weak low. Could we see something named? I'm certainly not ruling that out. And maybe we're due for something named. This is the latest that we've had a named storm, if it would happen before July the 1st, since 2014.
Yeah, right. So it's kind of, it's kind of interesting. And when you make that point, Jeremy, it's worth at least looking at, some of the statistics, right? So as you mentioned, zero named storms for this year. The average through today is 0.7. But for the last 9 years, we had had a named storm by this date. Last year, we had two named storms to this date. So we're definitely running a little slower. But what I think is kind of interesting is that when it comes to hurricane season, you play the long game here. And so because of that, even if we've had a slower than recent memory start, that doesn't mean at all that the rest of the season is going to go that direction.
Yeah, and a little slow start now. I mean, things are going to pick up. So we're transitioning out of the El Nino, not into a La Nina yet. That could happen maybe as we get closer to peak season. So we're in a bit of a transitional period right now. This area of interest, probably our best chance so far this season to see something develop. But again, it's only a 20% chance. And the good news, at least for my area, it should be staying well off the southeast coast. We're on the sort of the drier side of this
Right.
weak low. For you, though, it's just going to pull in tons and tons of tropical moisture. So if you're needing rain, you're going to get it. But unfortunately, some areas probably too much.
Well, and you mentioned that, and I think that that's a really good point because looking at some of the model data here, Southwest Florida in particular, Jeremy, is in an interesting little scenario. Take a look, okay? Cape Coral, which is near Fort Myers, has the potential to see nearly a foot of rainfall. And what's even more peculiar is that the National Weather Service there did not issue a flood watch. They issued it for the East Coast, Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade, so around Miami and West Palm Beach, but they never issued a flood watch for the Fort Myers area, even though the Fort Myers Naples areas have the highest likelihood of getting flooding rains.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And it'd be nice if you could send a little bit of that rain up to
Yeah.
the north. It cuts off very sharp. Looking at some of the accumulated rainfalls, once you get maybe North Florida or into Georgia, it's for the most part less than an inch of rain through the
Yeah.
end of the week. We have a very little rain in our forecast, and it's just all going to stay down there.
Yeah, so it's and you know, even for my area, Jeremy, what's interesting about it is that sharp cutoff and just trying to fine tune it, because this is my idea of rainfall, and basically my northern spots may get 2 inches of rain, my southern spots may get 4 inches of rain, but certainly there will be locally heavy downpours. But when you deal with these weak tropical things, right? It gets to be really difficult to kind of fine tune where that cutoff is and where that cutoff isn't.
Yeah, in these early season systems, it's they're more like rain producers, maybe just some gusty winds, something like that. We're not looking at big, huge, major hurricanes. Certainly, you could get a hurricane this time of year, but this time around, this is just kind of a tropical wave moving through, and we'll see if it once it gets over the Gulf Stream or off from the southeast coast, maybe we see some sort of development.
Yeah, and either way, you know, it's just I take this as again like a good reminder that hurricane season is here, like it or not. So, shall we look at some models and see what they're saying?
Yeah, let's do that because our maybe we could just call it our hurricane model that spins up everything
Yeah.
has been kind of active in the longer range, but we've kind of trained people to expect that.
Yeah, as long as you understand that the GFS does GFS stuff, you're going to be good to go. So this is a look at the GFS, and what we're looking at here is normalized pressure anomaly. Okay, so the idea is blues and greens, that's going to be the lowered pressures. So obviously it's trying to throw some piece of energy. You can kind of see it off of the eastern seaboard there, a 10-12 low, a 10-10 millibar low, nothing too dramatic, but pulling away. And that's what the National Hurricane Center is kind of showing, right? As that pulls away, the GFS wants to throw in another kind of area of low pressure toward like what, Baton Rouge, would you say there, Jeremy?
Yeah, it's been pretty consistent with trying to bring something in to the Gulf. When we look at the European model, that's been a little less aggressive with an actual low forming. It certainly sends some tropical moisture into the Gulf, maybe the central or western half of it, but it doesn't necessarily spin something up. I believe the Canadian model did try to form a low there. It doesn't take much this time of year to get a little low to form, and if it does, certainly the water's warm enough there that we could have some additional strengthening.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So there's something. And then another thing around the 19th, you know, these little cags that the GFS loves to play with. There's where it kind of gets interesting though. Around the 22nd around Louisiana, Jeremy, you notice there's another little thing, right? And that actually kind of fits our overall weather pattern just a little bit.
Yeah, we're kind of in this like it's like a 2 or 3 week window where we could see a couple systems Gulf or off the southeast coastline. The first one coming up here, and then as we move maybe a little bit down the road, as you're showing there, potentially something into the Gulf. None of them at this point look to be all that strong, although depending what computer model run you
Right.
look at, some have tried to strengthen something quite a bit, but we're talking about something that's maybe more than 180 hours out.
Right, right, exactly. Let me switch over. We'll look at the pressure normalized anomaly, looking at that same product, but using the GFS here. And like you said, Jeremy, the GFS is less bullish, we'll say, on these sorts of things. So let's kind of bring that full. And again, this is the most recent version of the European, kind of showing those blues, maybe a little something sneaking off the East Coast there, and then kind of toward the 90 hours out, lowering pressure around the Caribbean, nothing significant. But it is trying to show something, South Padre, Brownsville, Corpus Christi. It's trying to show some lowered pressure around the Bay of Campeche midweek, which is ironically about the time frame that I'm going to be in that area on a cruise. So it'll be kind of fun to see. I did buy the internet package. So in the event that I need to pop on and do a little broadcast from a rocking cruise ship, we can do that sort of thing.
All right, you're just hoping it's not rocking too much there.
I don't want any of this. I would like perfect sunshine, thank you.
Yeah. So I think the question is between the GFS, the European model, the strength of the ridge is kind of all about the placement of
Right.
anything as we go through maybe next week or the next 7 to 10 days or a little bit farther out than that, because European model seems like it has that ridge which is expansive across the Atlantic, and then into maybe Florida in the southeast, keeping things a little farther south. The GFS maybe not as strong with that ridge, so it's turning it more into the north central Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
That's something we'll be watching, but we're into that time of year where these areas of interest probably going to start being a lot more common.
And I mean that makes sense. This is about usually it's June 10th, June 11th, June 20th. I could go look it up real fast, of course. But we're within the time frame where we should have our first named storm of the season per climatology. So that would make sense. But for now, interestingly enough, Jeremy, we don't have that. We just kind of have this little area to watch, and the environment not particularly favorable for development. We're still almost like El Nino atmospherically.
Yeah, and that just would mean maybe the upper level winds aren't quite as supportive for area wide across the Atlantic basin for development, but certainly you can get some lows that would spin up here pretty quickly, and we'll see here in the days ahead if that actually happens or not. But then we're almost into July as we look ahead. Once you get past 10 days, and then that would open up our probably our next window where sometime first about week and a half or so of July, we'd start to kind of watch maybe more like parts of South Florida, the eastern half of the Gulf once again.
Yeah, so plenty of time to watch it, but for now, just kind of interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, there's for the first time this year, we've got spaghetti models showing up on our graphics. Who would have thunk it,
Yeah,
huh?
and it really looks like, as you were showing, maybe go back to the Invest graphic,
Yeah,
but all these little sort of disturbances, clusters of thunderstorms are hugging a stationary front. So if you're north of that boundary, which I am now, we're going to be hard pressed to really get a lot of rain up in our direction. And a lot of that active weather will be sitting near or just south of that boundary. And
right.
then right along that, potentially maybe a couple areas of low pressure could form and travel off to the northeast.
It's kind of like a feast or famine situation. So, it's the way it goes sometimes. Whereas Southwest Florida and South Florida, very much kind of in that zone, that messy side of things. I mean, if this were to be undergoing cyclogenesis, they would even be having to deal with like tornado threats on the Florida West Coast. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like anything's going to get rapidly organized quickly.
Right. Did you have any questions coming in by chance?
I've been awake since like 2 o'clock this morning. My brain's barely even operating at this point. Let's see here. Gotta love emphasis on Campeche. People are making fun because I say Campeche. Debbie says, please keep tagging me when he does a live. I'm still not. Oh, vey. I'm so sorry to see that. Just got a WESH announcement. Tropical wave off the Gulf Coast. Yeah, my station just put out a push alert on it. Our crack
Okay.
web staff doing their thing. So Brad's asking if this is a part of our long range forecast or if this is kind of a little just something else there.
I think it's sort of right around some of our time frames, but I think one thing that we have to stress this year is really pay attention to those hot spots. And number one was the Gulf of Mexico.
Yep.
I mean, that really jumped out at us as maybe where some of these are going to originate, where potentially later in the season we could see some of the strongest storms.
Yeah.
So it was north central Gulf all the way down to South Florida, and then maybe up through a little portion there into the Carolinas. So you look at Invest already. Well, what's that doing? It's going to move over a hot spot and get close to a second one that we had. So
Right.
um, whether this develops or not, if it's exactly within the dates we highlighted, um, it's going to be right by our hotspots.
Well, and to that point, Jeremy, here's our hotspots for the year, and by far and away the pattern absolutely focuses on the Gulf of Mexico. So to your point, that is 100% kind of a key location and certainly something that we're going to be watching there.
Yeah, and I think we'll get a good idea when this comes back, maybe another time or two this year. Um, we'll be watching these, and this is a track that we really saw last fall. Now, some models are trying to spin something, as you mentioned, down in that far southern Gulf, maybe closer to Texas. I think that would be um, maybe slightly more surprising if that happens, especially if something maybe went into Texas. But
Yeah.
a lot of those lows that we had in the fall that we were really kind of using as some indicators
Yeah.
were in the Western Gulf or maybe North Central and then track to the Northeast. So it wouldn't
Right.
take a lot to bump it towards Texas. But our thoughts are really once we get going through hurricane season that these areas highlighted in red are really the areas that have a much higher chance of seeing some sort of tropical activity moving forward.
Well, and Mike's asking, and that's a good point. Is this system going to break off into two lows, one in the Atlantic and one in the Gulf? And it kind of seems like the models are trying to do that. One along a frontal boundary toward you and developing perhaps off the East Coast, and then the other one hanging out over the Gulf of Mexico, just trying to figure its life out.
Yeah, one of them almost looks like it's a little system that may try to kind of inch north through the Caribbean
Yeah.
or across the Yucatan, and then we'll see how that plays out. But that was a little farther down the road, and even some models are tracking that towards Louisiana, which again would make sense
Right.
based off some of those indicators we had a while back.
Yeah. Very good. All right. That's all I've got. You have anything else?
No, I was looking longer range at some of the models that go into July, and I think we'll just keep an eye on things and finally something to talk about, though.
We're going to be doing these every Tuesday during hurricane season. So join us. And of course, as things perhaps threaten, we'll be popping on even more than that. But for now,
And then one thing
yeah.
we do want to mention next week, we may or may not be on here because we're both kind of on different vacations, and we'll see if we can line up or what's going on in the tropics. If
Yeah.
there is something huge, maybe we'll try to align things and get you a quick little update.
And if need be, we'll certainly do what we have to do. But if not, then we'll be enjoying the calm before the storms, so to speak.
Yeah,
So
we try to knock some of this vacation out. I usually August, September, I don't go far.
yeah, yeah, you just can't. You just can't. So all right, very good, my friend. Thank you very much. From increasing rain coverage, Central Florida, I'm West 2 meteorologist Eric Burris.
All right, and from Savannah, Georgia, I am WJCL 22 Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson.
Thank you, buddy. We'll see you next time.
All right, take care.